This month is all about recognizing the sacred in everything, including you. And to be this week is to be the door, to both move with divine and allow that steadiness of divine all in the same moment. And that sense of actual detachment. And all of us have the opportunity to recognize a spiritual journey in this and to be part of that, to be the door. And we are part of the sacred of the universe. Each and every molecule, every substance, everything is the sacred, which leads us to our spiritual journey, which means our spiritual journey is also sacred. Just being alive is your spiritual journey into being sacred. And recognizing and being willing to recognize the glory and the divinity in everything. And recognizing that creation is good. Creation is good. On Wednesday, when Tim Brainerd was here, that was his whole talk about the goodness of creation. And that with us in that creation moment, means that all of us have its original blessings. Creation offers us all original blessings. We as humanity, just as a whole through our history, we started actually to slip from that reminder that Jesus's life gave us the recognition of the divinity of creation. That his whole journey was to say everything is part of spirit. Even matter, everything, spirit and matter are all part of the divine. The seen and the unseen are one. Somewhere in the 4th century, St. Augustine wrote about duality. He started to shift the narrative, right? He said that maybe nature and our recognition of science and stuff is not the same thing as everything else, that we are maybe separate from all that's going on around us. And that coincided with the fall of empire, right? And with the fall of the empire, all of a sudden, when they regrouped together in Nicaea, there became this alignment between the rulers and the religion, between the Christianity and the rulers of humanity all at the same time. There was this alignment that took place at the Nicene Council, and there they started to solidify this idea of separateness, that instead of original blessings, there was original sin. This was very convenient for people that wanted to be in power, because if you're not so worthy and you have some sin that you need to somehow get rid of, then you're led more easily because somebody else has the answers and you do not. And the actual heart and soul of the reason Jesus walked the planet started to slip a little bit in this time. And the attachment of being a part of certain categories, like we had to be seen as loyal, we had to be recognized as being loving, we had to have humility in such a way that was in alignment with what authority said humility looks like, what it even meant to be faithful, and what kind of things we needed to do to be faithful. All that became structured. Jesus became a way in which to achieve grace instead of recognizing that he showed we all are already grace. We all are already grace. The spiritual journey, though, when we recognize that, empties all of these misconceptions, those from our past that are somehow still with us in any way today, way far in the past, like the 4th century, and even things we may have in our own past. We empty ourselves from that. Sally McFaig from the Center of Action and Contemplation, this is a quote from her: "If one understands God to be not a substance, but the active, creative love at work in the entire universe, then loving God is not something in addition to the loving world, but rather the acknowledgement that in loving the world, one is participating in that planetary process, which some identify as God. Pick your word there. We know any word works, right? Universe, divine, God, Jesus, energy. We recognize us as part of the process of self-emptying love at all levels. And when we empty, we can fill up. This is actually detachment. Detachment, I think it's a bad rap on what it actually is. It's like, some people think it's just like, get rid of that. Let's just not pay attention to that. And yet it's that emptying into the recognition that the loving God is us loving the world. That's how we recognize it, and that's how we be. I want to read to you from a little piece from Meister Eckhart. I'll start with his quote: "If the heart is ready to receive the highest, it must rest on absolutely nothing." So we don't hold on to these things that others say we need to do in order to achieve. We rest in that blank space that can be filled with that divine universe. Eckhart says, "You should know that the outer man can be active while the inner man is completely free of this activity and unmoved. Here is an analogy. A door swings open and shuts on its own hinge. I would compare the outer woodwork of the door to the outer man and the hinge to the inner man. When the door opens and shuts, the boards move back and forth, but the hinge stays in the same place and is never moved thereby." Now I ask, what is the object of pure detachment? My answer is that the object of pure detachment is neither this nor that. It rests on absolutely nothing. And I will tell you why. Pure detachment rests on the highest, and he is at his highest in whom God can work all his will. And so if the heart is ready to receive the highest, it must rest on absolutely nothing. And in that lies the greatest potentiality in which we can exist. Again, I ask, what is the prayer of a detached heart? And my answer is that detachment and purity cannot pray. For whoever prays wants God to grant him something, or else wants God to take something from him. But a detached heart desires nothing at all, nor has it anything it wants to get rid of. Therefore, it is free of all prayers, or its prayer consists of nothing but being in that uniform place of alignment with God, with divine. That is the true prayer. Therefore, it is totally subject to divine, and therefore it is the highest degree of uniformity with divine. It is also the most receptive to divine influence. Being in that alignment place, basically it's that place of not worrying that we talked about all last month, right? It's that place of just being. Our transformation, our willingness to empty into all of that is the spiritual journey. Now, there are 4 steps that are recognized as the spiritual journey. And this is from some of the teachings that Matthew Fox brings forth to us. Now these, I'm going to list the 4, but know that the 4 are interchangeable. We don't do them in a row. It's kind of like the stages of grief. It's not really in a row. It's kind of like a big squiggle all over the place. But at some points we can recognize where we are at in that flow of life. The positive, or the opening, is that first stage. We recognize joy, we experience it. Amazement opens our hearts in some moment, and we're in awe and wonder of our connection, our beingness, and something around us. Much like what I told you earlier about the autumn crocus that popped up in my yard. It's like, wow, that is amazing. That's an amazing little nugget from the universe to share. The second is the negative. So we all experience some kind of suffering or grief or both in our lifetimes. We move into the silence and in the darkness. Some may have an actual dark night of the soul. But in the quiet and that silence and that darkness, sometimes we're able to see even more than ever before. The third is the creative. So it's a creative expression. It's sharing our talents. It's a new birth. It's spirit working through us, flowing through and recognizing that Christ light in all things. And since we talk about recognizing that Christ light each week and have the ability to share, we know none of this is in order because we can be creative and recognize that at any time. And the fourth is a transformation moment where we are in full service, compassion, healing. We are showing and sharing our true nature to the fullest. The archetype for that transformation is the transfiguration moment. The transfiguration moment. Bishop Mark Andrus says, when we face the archetype of the transfiguration, we are confronted with our need to distinguish between worldly power and the power of God. The power of God prevails, not just by dominating those who resist it, but by binding itself to the lives and history of humans. The triumph is by means of the acceptance of reality, not its avoidance or its conquest. I'm going to read you the transfiguration moment from Mark, just in case we forgot what we're talking about. And in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up to a high mountain where they could be alone by themselves. There in their presence, he was transfigured. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than any earthly bleacher could make them. Elijah appeared to them with Moses, and they were talking to Jesus. Then Peter spoke to Jesus. Rabbi, he said, it's wonderful for us to be here. So let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He didn't know what to say. They were so frightened. And a cloud came, covered them in shadow. And then there came a voice from the cloud. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Then suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them. Only Jesus. Now, you would think that number 4 in line, transformation and transfiguration, would give us a get out of suffering free card, right? And yet Jesus' most suffering came after this moment in the story. That's when most of the suffering take place. So transformation doesn't take away our earthly or human experience, but it does put it into perspective. It puts us into perspective. We no longer attach the world and our life to what we think we need to show outward to show that we are on the right track, right? It's not looking for a certain type of success and happiness to know that everything and we are still the divine. It may not look like what the rest of the world thinks it needs to look like. We remember that, like Jesus, that if we remain ourselves and we actually remove ourselves sometimes to the quiet mountaintop to allow that connection, we get a fuller connection. In this case, voices from the past, voices that already may have gone through that, sharing their experience from the other side of life, from the spirit world, presenting, reminders that we are always guided in our future. And I love the image of the cloud and the shadow, because it reminds us that no one outside of us in that moment may fully understand the changes that have happened within. They may see something totally else. They may think either, how you see somebody after 10 years and they're like, what? I thought I knew you, you know, and that's not the case, because we have these moments where we are transformed, and our outer appearance, you know, maybe all right, but it's clouding everything that's happening on the inside that's not fully visible. The apostles could not see through that shadow. They didn't really understand. They didn't understand the internal transformation or what was really to be moved forward. But in that moment, we recognize Jesus not attaching himself to any kind of outcome. Nothing is either good or bad. It's part of the experience. I want to close with some thoughts from Matthew Fox. He says, how do we experience our own transfiguration? How do we undergo, as other Christs, so profound an experience on our own mountaintops? And how do we allow such experiences to penetrate our hearts and souls and minds? And how do we witness this light, this Christ in others and the world around us? How do we recognize gratitude and share that? How are we the door, both steady and moving? Allowing that light and that breeze to be fully present and moving and fulfilling. Amen.